Okay. If you are struggling to hear, there is a message in the chat box to your right where you can actually make a phone call to hear. We have very few people perhaps sometimes struggle their end with this. So do make a note of the number and the PIN number there if you can hear me. I know some people are saying they can hear fine. So hopefully that's okay for the majority of people, but I do know some people have a problem their end. So we always put that message on. Okay. I do know we've got a few more people. Looks like they're registering now and logging in. So we'll give them a couple of minutes. We're just on 11 o'clock. While we wait for those to join us, just say a very good morning to you. For those who don't know me, my name's David Lloyd from TPAS Cymru, and I'll be hosting the session. I'll be doing probably the easy bit because we've got our guest speaker, Dr Staffan Evans, who will cover in the detail of today's session. So welcome to this TPAS Cymru webinar. And we've been running these webinars now for the last few weeks since lockdown. We've moved on digital and they're all proving to be really popular. Yeah, and this one is no exception. Again, we've got a lot of interest in this subject area, which is really great. But it also made me think, isn't it quite disappointing that even in the 21st century in Wales, we're talking about poverty and how we tackle poverty as well. And it's something I imagine we'll talk about even in the months and perhaps years ahead as a result of the pandemic and economic recession, etc. But something we'll look at later on, and I'm sure Staffan will cover that subject area as well. I will shortly hand over to Staffan, Dr Staffan Evans. He's from the Bevan Foundation. I'll let Staffan tell you a bit more about that organisation and the valuable work they do across Wales as well. You can see there, there is a chat facility. People want to put any comments in and questions. We've already had some questions in for this session, so we'll try and take those as well if you've got time. If we don't have time, Staffan will be available, through email if you want to follow up something with him at a later date. Also as well, it may be that I theme some of the questions if there's a bit of overlap, just to make sure we get through some of the main subjects we want to. So do please put any comments in or questions or thoughts as well. And we do record these webinars and they're available on our website at a later date for our members, so do check that out as well. Or if you're not sure where it is, you can contact me at info@tpas.cymru, info@tpas.cymru, and I will get that to you. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Staffan just a minute, just to say you can still follow us. Lots going on online, so do follow us on our various different platforms and check out our website. We've got some other great webinars coming up as well. If you're interested in housing regulation, if you're interested in scrutiny, there's all sorts of different things coming up. So do check that on our events page on our website and follow us on social media. You can tweet about today if you want to as well. Just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors for making our events possible, particularly Wales and West as our main sponsor, and also to the Pobble Group, who sponsor our tenant voice work as well. So thanks to those. And also obviously to our friends at Welsh Government, as we're part funded by Welsh Government through a grant as well. So thank you to those. Yeah, as I said, my name's David Lloyd from TPAS Cymru. I'll be hosting today. My email's there if you do need to get in touch with me at any point or follow in today's session, or if you just want to know more about our work going forward as an organisation, I'll try and help you with that as well. As I said today, we're really pleased to be joined by Staffan, a leading figure in the Bevan Foundation, looking at poverty issues across Wales. And he's got some really interesting facts, figures and information as well. And hopefully we'll have some good discussions around that afterwards as well. And it's a really apt time to be inviting Staffan along today. They've got some new research, but also about, I think, the challenges for the Wales economy, for people's livelihoods as well going forward. So some interesting information I'm sure you'll hear today. So I'll hand you over to Staffan now. You should be able to see Staffan will pop up on the main picture, so you won't see me for a little bit. He'll talk about housing and poverty with a focus on Wales and the follow-up to COVID-19.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for David for the introduction and for the invitation as well to come to speak to you this morning. As David said, it's obviously an apt time to be talking about these issues, and hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have a clear understanding of the extent of poverty in Wales, an understanding of why housing is so important when it comes to the causes of poverty, but also some of the solutions, and also kind of maybe an understanding of what we can do to solve poverty, and hopefully feel inspired to take some action, in your own organisations or in your own communities. So, firstly about the Bevan Foundation, I think a couple of these slides have gone a bit skew-with in transferring over to this software, but if people, we'll happily circulate the slides after anyway. But in terms of the Bevan Foundation, if you're not familiar with us, we're a think tank. We're based in Merthyr, but we work all over Wales. And what we try to do is to develop lasting solutions to poverty and inequality in Wales. And we do that by gaining insights, doing research, talking to people, finding out what's happening in Wales and what the issues. Then we try and develop solutions, coming up with ideas about what we can do to make these issues better. And finally, we want to create change. We want to inspire people to change the way they do stuff so that we don't see these issues continuing in the long term. And if you want to find out more about us, there's a link there to our website. There's loads of different ways you can get involved, even as an individual or as an organisation as well. And so check out our website to find out a bit more about us and some of the stuff that we can do to support you and you can do to support us as well. So before getting started, I think it's useful really to talk about what poverty is in the context of what we're going to be talking about today. And when we're talking about poverty in the context of what's happening in Wales, the measure that's most commonly used is the relative income measure of poverty. And under that measure, someone is said to live in poverty if their household income is less than 60% of the median income, adjusted for the household type and after housing costs. So what that means is if you put everyone's household income between, from the bottom to the top, right in a row, the median income is the person bang in the middle. And we use that rather than average, because obviously with average income, a handful of people earning a lot of money can completely skew what's expected. And under this measure, it's assumed that you don't have enough money or resources to meet your needs. So it's not a perfect measure. There may well be some people who have 59% of the median income, but who are actually managing okay, whereas there might be someone with 62, 63% but are struggling. But it gives us a rough sense of what the problem is in Wales. The data we've got in Wales is slightly limited because it's only available over 3 years, over a 3-year average. So that makes it quite hard, to pick out a specific impact of something for a period of time. It takes time to feed through, but it gives us a good idea of where things are going, if things are improving, getting worse. And as I said, it's not perfect, but it's all there is really. And it does give us a real sense of what's going on in Wales. And what does it tell us? Well, just before, as lockdown was kicking in March, the latest round of poverty data was released by the Office for National Statistics. And what that showed was that poverty in Wales wasn't really going anywhere. So it was down slightly by 1 percentage point on the year before. But, if you look over the last 5 years on the graph there, you can see, things have really fluctuated, but they've not really gone one way or the other really in terms of making significant progress. So across Wales, 23% of people are living in poverty. That's about 700,000 people. So, that's clearly a huge, huge number. It's probably a number we don't hear enough about. And it highlights, the extent to which the challenges, I guess, we're facing as a nation in terms of making sure that that people don't go without and that people aren't suffering. So that's the general picture, looking across Wales, how many people living in poverty, are things improving? But obviously poverty doesn't affect everyone the same. There's some people who are more vulnerable and at greater risk of being in poverty than others. And that does come through in the data. So if we looked at who's at most risk of living in poverty, children in workless households are by far at greatest risk. And that goes for workless households in general. So whilst we've heard a lot, maybe people are saying that work isn't paying, we've seen rise in 0 hours contracts and all of that sort of stuff. Whilst that is obviously a problem, being out of work is an even bigger problem. And that's obviously a massive concern given what's going on at the moment. And we'll come on to touch on that shortly. Another group of people who are at a very high risk of living in poverty are people living in large families with 3 or more children. And the reason we think they're particularly at risk, and they're a group that's becoming even greater at risk as well, that the situation is deteriorating, not improving, is because of there's a cap now if you've got more than 2 children in terms of how much benefits you can receive. So we think that's the reason why they're so specifically at risk and why the picture's getting worse. Lone parent families, obviously at greater risk, and renting households as well are at far greater risk of living in poverty than people who are owner occupiers. But at the same time, it's not only important to look at the risk of living in poverty, it's also important, if we really want to solve poverty in Wales, to get rid of that 700,000, then we actually need to target the groups where a lot of people live in poverty as well. And actually, the groups where a lot of people live in poverty isn't the same as the group where where the risk is necessarily highest. So whilst being in a workless household puts you at a massive risk of living in poverty, working households have actually got the greatest number of people living in poverty within them. So over half of the people living in poverty in Wales have at least got one member of that household working on a part-time or a full-time basis. So clearly, whilst we need to target poverty in workless households because the risk is so massive, there's also a need to think about what we're doing in working households if we really want to make a difference in terms of the numbers. Disability is a very, very, very big factor in terms of increases your risk, but also the numbers of people. And couples with children as well are particularly at risk. And I think an interesting thing to note there as well is that whilst owner-occupied housing is by far the lowest risk housing tenure of living in poverty, it still actually accounts for the biggest number of people in poverty, just because owner-occupied housing is by far the most prevalent way that sort of housing people live in Wales. So all of that's really important to consider when we think about solutions. And when we think about what causes poverty, there's probably three particular risks. So first, work is one of the factors. So as we already heard, if you're not in work, your risk of poverty is far higher. And over the last 10 years, so kind of before we go on to look at coronavirus, we had seen actually big increases in the number of people in employment and as a percentage of people, kind of the overall population in terms of the employment rate. But whilst we were seeing more people working, it wasn't necessarily working for everyone, because the amount of money people were taking home with them was less than inflation. So people are still worse off now than they were after the last crash in 2009. So that's a real kind of something to think about in terms of as we try and build back from this crisis. And not only that, we've seen a growth in insecure jobs, 0 hours contracts, and people not being paid the living wage. So, and all of those sorts of things that I'm sure you're very familiar with. The second issue we've had then is that we've seen huge reforms of social security, and so the benefit system since 2010, but they have really hammered the value of benefits families receive. So, a family, a household with children are cumulatively over £5,000 worse off than before welfare reform was introduced. Households with disabled adults are over £3,000 worse off. So we've seen work not keep up with inflation, and we've seen people on benefits not only not keep up with inflation, but actually the money they get has been absolutely decimated over recent years, which means that it's not there acting as a safety net for people as and when we need that support, which is and I think that's highlighted what we've seen recently. The UK government has increased the amount of universal credit by 20 quid a week overnight. It's made some other small changes as well to universal credit, which highlights the thing that they knew that it wasn't fair and wasn't working for people either. Finally, we've got really high living costs as well. So, if you think of what causes people to, poverty is not having enough money. So that partly depends on how much you've got coming in, and then it also depends on how much you've got coming out. And this is where housing probably really comes into its own. So we've seen average social rents go up £27.89 a week over a period of time. Bus fares have rocketed, and food has gone up as well. So all of these things are coming together and pinching people. So it means that even if we make some individual policy decisions to try and ease poverty, these are all coming together and really squeezing people and limiting the effectiveness of some of those policies. So why does housing matter? Well, firstly, housing is by far the biggest cost anyone faces. When you think of your own circumstances, and pretty much anyone who doesn't own outright their home, if they're paying for a mortgage or paying for a rent, it's the biggest cost anyone faces, and you haven't got a choice either. You have to pay it. And housing costs alone can push some people into poverty. That's quite a rudimentary way of looking at it, but when you're looking at the poverty figures, you can look before and after housing costs. And usually we use after housing costs because obviously, as I said, you haven't got the choice, so you have to pay for it. But if you look before housing costs, 19% of people in Wales live in poverty. After housing costs, however, it raises to 23%. So that shows that for some people, just their housing cost alone can be what tips them over the edge. That's a bit simplistic way of looking at it, but I think it highlights, the important role they play. And it's also important to consider, it's not just rent or mortgage repayments. There's other housing stuff that are also non-optional. So if you think of utility bills, maybe council tax, all of these have a real impact on how much money families have got in their pocket, and then therefore their risk of being in poverty. And when you're looking at housing as part of the issue here, owner-occupied housing costs more than 5 times the earnings for low-paid and median earners. So if you want to buy a house, your chances of getting enough money saved up is really difficult unless you're in a position where maybe your grandparents owned a house and they passed away and you've been able to inherit some money from them. At the same time, where people are finding it more difficult to afford to buy a house, rents are also unaffordable for too many people. So the average rent on a 2-bedroom property is unaffordable for the lowest 25% of earners in all areas of Wales and in both the social and private rental sector. So, people haven't got enough to coming in to be able to afford their rent. Now, I know there's some additional support available for housing benefits and the housing element of universal credit, but that's not necessarily, not everyone in this position will be getting that support. There may be some families who are in work who are earning just a little bit too much to get that benefit, but who are still struggling to pay their rent, be that in the social or private sector. And against that backdrop then, the fact that we've still seen social rents rising is particularly concerning. We've got the new rent setting mechanism that will allow social landlords to increase their rents above inflation for 5 years. We'll come on, there's obvious reasons why you might want to do that, but, it is going to weaken and put more pressure on people in that position. As I said, there's other household energy costs. There's also the cost of moving home. So, I know TPAS have done some work on flooring, for example. So the fact that it's not a standard thing you get in the social housing sector puts pressure on people when they move. The cost of having to buy new furniture. And also, is there enough support outside the social housing sector? As I said, the sector where there's most people living in poverty is in the owner-occupied sector. But how much support really is available for someone struggling in that sector, and beyond maybe work of organisations like Citizens Advice, but just work with everyone? So are we missing out on being able to help some people as well? So that's kind of the general picture, as things were before COVID-19. But what impact might we expect COVID-19 to have? Well, we can expect it really to have an impact on all 3 drivers of poverty. So the number of people claiming out of work benefits, so you might have seen this in the news this week in Wales, has doubled since this time last year. And pretty much all of that doubling has come between March and April. So we are clearly going to have a big rise in unemployment in Wales. I don't think there's any way around that, or certainly there was certainly a rise in the number of people who are not in work. It depends where people go on the government statistics. The furlough scheme provides some protection at the moment, but that is crucially important in terms of how we're going to bring that to an end. Because whilst there are some sectors, when furlough comes to an end, people will be able to get back into work and carry on as is. Is the hospitality sector, for example, realistically going to be back up and running at full speed even this time next year, in terms of building up the capacity within that sector? So we really need to think about how we help people to try and limit the number of people that become unemployed, because their risk of poverty is massive. At the same time, people are on furlough, so they're seeing their money reduced as well. So that's obviously going to have an impact on poverty. If you're only receiving 80% of your wages, that means you've got less money in the bank to spend on getting support. And we've done some research which suggests that about 22.7% of Welsh businesses, about 25,000, have temporarily shut due to COVID-19, either because they have to, such as kind of restaurants, or because their business has dried up, so they've decided it's easier just to go on furlough and kind of mothball for a couple of months. At the same time, we have seen more positive things when it comes to social security. So we've seen temporary changes, as I mentioned, to make it more generous. But at the same time, people have lost access to other support. So, 60,000 children in Wales were receiving free school meals. Schools shut. Thankfully, there's been a lot of really good work going on, with now 17 out of the 22 local authorities in Wales providing families with the option of getting cash payments paid directly into their accounts instead of that. But the families are missing out on some of the extra support that they used to be getting. And whilst all this is going on, living costs haven't gone away. You still have to pay on your house. You still have to pay for your food. And if anything, food has gone up, especially with panic buying. And that's a concern going into the longer term. If there's going to be a shortage of fruit and veg pickers, as we hear in the news, what does that mean for food prices going forward? People are home more, so they're having to use more of their gas, electric, and internet as well. So all of these things we can expect to really squeeze families, a lot of them who are already struggling. So what can we do? What can we do to make sure that housing is part of the solution? Well, we're publishing a new report on Wednesday, looking at how we can provide people with better support with a housing cost in Wales. That report is focused predominantly on what Welsh Government and Welsh local authorities can do. So we haven't looked necessarily at what housing associations themselves can do, or at UK-wide systems such as housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit. But we think it gives us a real indication of what people can do, and gives us options and things to consider, I think, more broadly as well in the housing sector. So with our work, what we did was we tried to map out all the different support schemes that are currently available for people in Wales. And a lot of these, they're really disjointed. They provide about £350 million worth of support every year, which is more than the entire agriculture and environment spend in Wales. But they're not viewed as cohesive. And, some of you might be aware of some, but not the others. And we think these need to be brought together to make it easier for people to access them and to make them work better. So the schemes we looked at included the council tax reduction scheme. So that's a scheme where you don't have to pay council tax because you're on a low income, or you get a reduction in how much you have to pay. The discretionary assistance fund, and this is one I think is really important if you're working with tenants at the moment to really promote this one, because it can either provide immediate small cash payments, about £60 on average, to someone facing financial crisis, or it can provide support with things like sofas, fridges, freezers, etc. For someone moving into a home and they can't afford to buy that furniture. But they put an extra £11 million into that to deal with coronavirus. So if you are working with tenants and you're thinking people are struggling, that's one absolutely to flag up with them in terms of providing real cash support now. So discretionary housing payment then is the third one. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. The money from that comes from Westminster, but it's administered by local authorities, and Welsh Government and local authorities do have the option to top up that kind of that extra support for people. Disabled Facilities Grant, which is cash grant for someone to make adaptations to their home if they've got a disability, and you have to be on low income to get that as well. And then finally, we've got the Warm Homes Programme. The NEST scheme in particular is the one we've included, which provides people with options to get adaptations to their home to make them more energy efficient to try and tackle fuel poverty. So all of these provide really, really useful, valuable support to people. But we have found that there are some limitations to them. So we've been talking to people in communities, and some of the limitations we found are that, firstly, the support is difficult to access. As I said, they're really widely dispersed. None of them have the same eligibility criteria. So, if someone came to the local authority and said, "Hi, I'm struggling with my housing," they'd have to fill in 3, 4, 5 different forms to get all the support they were eligible for. There wasn't kind of a one system approach to doing it. The support is not always enough either. So we've heard about the discretionary assistance fund, for example. People who live by themselves are eligible to get support to buy an armchair, but not a sofa. Well, fine, but is that really worth it in the long term in terms of if someone's going to be more isolated in their home, not part of the community? And also we've heard that some of the schemes might not be achieving what they were set up for. So DAF and discretionary housing payments are increasingly becoming part of a long-term social security system. So I'm sure many of you work in housing associations will know that, a lot of people are just receiving rolling discretionary housing payments now. Well, it's a discretionary scheme. Is that what it was really designed for? But shouldn't that money be used more targeted at helping people facing crisis? and shouldn't that support be provided more securely through a broader system? So that's what we've looked at, and we'll have far more detail in the report coming out on Wednesday. And we've made some recommendations, we think, and some proposed some ideas to change things. So we've got some short-term fixes, which are quite technical, so I won't go through them in too much detail, but happy to discuss them more with people if you're interested. So we think there's some stuff you could do to make it easier for people to get access to the support, and we make it more consistent, the amount of support you can get through discretionary housing payments. We think it's really important that DAF provides more than the minimum support for people, so you can get that sofa, not just an armchair. And I think an interesting one, based kind of some of the stuff we heard from TPAS around carpets, we think that instead of, one solution would be to give more money to DAF and allow that to cover carpets, or housing associations to use. I know a lot of housing associations have got hardship funds, so be able to use that. But actually, we thought, well, you're just moving money from one place to another. So why don't we just update Welsh housing quality standards and just say all new social housing needs to have adequate flooring? And then maybe, okay, there might need to be more money to go into social landlords to help them facilitate that. But it's far easier than having the person who needs that support having to go around all these different places to get access to the money to do that. Longer term, though, we think there's kind of more radical things that could be done. So we think there's stuff that could be done around council tax. Could you get rid of single person discount and just make more people get the council tax benefit so that the money's targeted at people who really need it? But fundamentally, we know council tax isn't fair, so why don't we change it? Come up with a fairer tax? A lot of people have been arguing for that already. We think there's a need for Welsh Government to significantly increase the amount of social housing grant it provides. As I've heard people say, one of the reasons why social landlords have faced the pressure of putting up rents is because they're being asked to deliver more social housing, so that needs to be paid for on less grant, and that needs to be paid for from somewhere. So we've seen social landlords borrow more money, and rents obviously plays a role in that, and they will continue to do that. There's no doubt about that. But if we put more public money into constructing new social housing, could that ease some of the pressures on social landlords that are able to target it, so that pressure isn't quite as prevalent? And if you think, for the budget this year, the Welsh Government made £223 million available for social housing grants. And so that's for government money for building new social housing. But they made an extra £210 million to help for a self-build fund. Well, we'd question how actually useful that is in terms of actually tackling poverty, if that's what you really want to get to. So could we not move that money and just put it into the social housing grant as an example? Longer term as well, we think there might be cases to devolve some powers over benefits to develop a more cohesive system. And finally, I think something we think that should be done is to try and pull all of these different schemes together and formulate something that we've dubbed the Welsh Housing Guarantee. So it's a rights-based system, and everyone in Wales would be guaranteed a home that's affordable to rent, a warm home, and a home that's fit to live in. And we think that the way you could do that is you could pull all the different schemes together, and then you could go to the local authority, turn up, saying, I'm having trouble with my housing, and we'd be able to help you with all of that in one go. There's much more detail on that in the report as well, if people are interested in it. Finally, I think it was useful to provoke maybe some ideas about what you can do in your communities. Can you think about, is there ways that you can help boost someone's income in your communities? Is there a way you can make sure someone gets all the support they're entitled to through the social security system? And is there ways that you can go and cut people's living costs to really help them out? So I think those are really useful questions that you should be considering when making every decision, frankly, in terms of making sure that ending poverty really becomes our priority. I think that kind of brings an end to kind of my whistle-stop tour through all of that. As I said, we're more than happy to discuss if people want more detail after today, but I'll hand back over to David for any questions.
Okay, I'm going to say a big thank you to Staffan now. Lots of information about some of the statistics and some of the groups that are really affected by poverty in Wales as well. Some groups which I hadn't been aware of, and I think as well, realising the effect of staying at home, particularly for families with school children at home. They're using more electricity, they're feeding the children more, perhaps they're not accessing school dinners. So some of those are the more obvious issues that affect poverty, which you may not be thinking about as well. So we've got a few questions coming in, and some subject areas, some themes which we'll take a look at, Stefan, if that's okay. So I just wanted to clarify one thing. You mentioned about the DAF, the Discretionary Assistance Fund, which sounds fantastic. I'd heard a little bit about it, but you said that's increased. How do people claim, and is it fairly easy, or
So that is it's Welsh Government provide the money for it, and if you basically just Google Discretionary Assistance Fund, it should take you through to a page on the Welsh Government website, and you can do it online. But you can also call if you're working with people who are rather doing stuff by the phone, and they're able to call up and ask for support as well. But that's all we need to do is to fill out their details, and I'm told that it is working quite well. So the number of support we're putting out through it has doubled. Welsh Government has put in an extra 11 million because of that, and the money comes to people really quickly as well. So I think they try to get back to you within 24 hours with a yes or no to the cash element, and then 80% of the cash payments are processed within 12 hours from that. So it is working quite quickly. I was just been off a call before joining this one with the Welsh Poverty Coalition, and I've heard that the Trussell Trust now is going to be working with Welsh Government with that scheme. And what they're hoping is that people will come in. If you need help from the food bank, obviously the first time, great, but they're arguing, and I think rightly, that the long-term solution is to give people more cash so they don't have to rely on food banks. So they're putting now more information in their parcels to let people know about this. But if people you're working with have the ability to do that, I think that would be a really, really valuable thing to promote.
Yes, Steph, we had a couple of questions come in beforehand, and there was a comment sort of linked to this. So it's generally about the role of social landlords, what else they can do to tackle poverty, because we've seen a lot of landlords aiming to keep rents affordable. Some landlords are looking at sort of employment and skills projects for their tenants to get people back into the workplace. So it's really, what else could social landlords in Wales be doing to tackle poverty? Is there anything else which you'd think that's something else they need to do?
So I think a lot of the work that's already been done is really, really good. So as part of this project, we got to go up to Merthyr Valley's Homes is a benefit drop-in centre, one of their benefit drop-in centres, to have conversations with people. So yeah, that was a really effective thing, I think, in terms of being able to provide people able to come in and get that support. And I know lots of other social landlords do that. So that sort of stuff is really important. I think there's also kind of in terms of decision making. So is everyone working for your organisation paid the living wage? We've heard a lot about in this crisis, that carers, for example. So if you've got carers working in extra care facilities, are they actually, a lot of the people taking the greatest risks at the moment are some of the lowest paid people in our society. So are we doing enough with that? But also kind of maybe supporting communities. Communities have got ideas about stuff they want to do, to provide that support for people as well. And making sure that we listen to tenants as well. I know this is something, you've done work with before, about TPAS about the holistic picture as well when it comes to housing costs. So it's all well and good, bringing rents down and making rents more affordable is great, but if service charges go up as a result, actually no one's better off. So bringing them all together, I think, is really, really useful. Kind of to think a bigger picture and listen to what people think in terms of their priorities.
Okay.
I've just seen one of the comments there as well about to skip ahead, but going back to DAF about the 3 awards in the previous 12 months. Welsh Government have got rid of that requirement now for the duration of the coronavirus. So I think that's something I should have said as well. So in addition to the extra money, people can keep making applications, basically. So I know it's not perfect, but that is something they have done. So I should have mentioned that earlier, sorry.
Stefan, you see a question there just picked up around, I'm not sure I'll be able to answer this one, but we mentioned about the importance of, you mentioned furniture, but also around flooring and those costs which impact people when they're moving in particular. Question here, I'm not sure you asked this, what would Bevan Foundation class as adequate flooring, Stefan? Any thoughts on what might be a minimum standard? You mentioned standards, what might be a minimum?
a tactical specification we haven't got, but I think, you know, kind of, I think we all kind of have the broad sense in terms of, you know, so a lot of social landlords already provide this service. So, you know, kind of working with all social landlords that provide it would be a good starting place, I think, in terms of the way they do it. And I think what we're keen to get away from is the position at the moment where I think David Wilton actually mentioned when we did last week, where we've got some social housing tenants getting taxis to go to kind of a site where they're getting carpet tiles paid for through support from the housing association from Welsh Government and bringing it back and putting it in, or kind of what we've got, you know, carpets being ripped out and stuff, you know, kind of we're not proposing kind of the highest standard going, but we think kind of working with those social landlords that already provide this could be kind of a really sensible way to go, and I think it would just be far more efficient use of funds we're already investing. We're already spending a lot of money dealing with the consequences of it. So why don't we just put it into the system? You know, I think that, just the bureaucracy we'd be saving for starters, I think would be quite useful.
Yeah, and I think there was an interesting point someone made about some often comes up about the, you know, not just adequacy, but the practicability of the flooring as well. You know, will it be easy to maintain longer term? If it's laminate, will it be better for families perhaps and things like that? Or well, it could be worse for the neighbours because of noise. So there's probably needs to be some flexibility in terms of what sort of flooring to meet specific tenants' needs as well in the longer term. There's I'm not sure how much detail you want to go into this point, Staffan, but a comment about would the Bevan Foundation be interested in campaigning for universal basic income? Bit specialist, we may want to give a brief overview on Bevan's thoughts on that, or something more radical in terms of income tax system.
Yeah, so that's something that a lot more people are talking about at the moment. So if people are unfamiliar with it, the idea with that is that universal basic income is that we pay everyone in society the same sum, and basically kind of there's loads of different ways you could kind of go with it, but kind of I guess the kind of the more ambitious approach is that you'd get rid of the social security system and you'd roll this out in instead. You'd get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy and you'd guarantee everyone got a decent amount of money. So as a broad principle, I think there's lots to commend around it, in terms of, you know, it highlights that the money we give people at the moment isn't enough, and there needs to, you know, we need to do more with it. We need to have that debate about how we support people. But I think it is one of those things where there needs to be more discussion about the nitty gritty on kind of how it works, because it's one of those ideas it's only worth pursuing if it actually works in practice, if it makes sense. So kind of if we roll out a universal base sum of money for everyone in society, some people need more to live. So if you think of people with a disability, would need more money. So you'd still have to have the means tested. So form of support maybe for people with disability. Children, you might need some extra funds there. So already you're introducing bureaucracy back into the system there before even starting. And then also thinking about kind of the position with single people versus couples. So one of the reasons that single people are far more likely to live in poverty is that your living costs, you know, cost of renting a one-bed flat is the same if you're a couple or if you're a single person. You know, you still got the energy and utilities to pay for, etc. It takes more out of your money. So if we pay it to the individual, is there a risk, for example, that it makes it harder for people to leave an abusive relationship because they're taking a huge financial hit when they're leaving that relationship? So there's all of these unintended consequences that really need to be thought through. And I think it's actually important to have some of those really nitty-gritty conversations before actually debating the broad principle, because those actually decide whether the broad principle is worth it or not. So I think, yes, welcome the debate, but we really need to move that debate onto the how would we make this work, rather than a yes or no without even discussing that to start with, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that thorough answer, Stefan. The whole subject area, I think someone's already mentioned, it could be a webinar in its own right, a universal basic income, the benefits and the advantages and the disadvantages and the flaws as well. So maybe something we come back to you with, Stefan. I'm just going to push on ahead with the last couple of sort of themed questions, really, around a few people mentioned before, and you mentioned yourselves, around the desire from Welsh Government, the expectation from Welsh Government really for social landlords to develop more social housing, more homes in Wales. And obviously landlords need to find a funding for that themselves to contribute to that grant from Welsh Government as well. And obviously, tenants' rents pay an element of that. In terms of, is that fair, or is there another way? You mentioned around increasing the grant. Is there something else that could happen to enable social landlords to keep their rents affordable, but also grow and develop new homes?
I think the current crisis actually presents a really good opportunity on this front, for the social housing sector. So clearly we're going to have a big crisis in terms of unemployment. The construction industry is not going to be removed from that. If you think of all these office blocks that we've had popping up in Cardiff, how many people are actually going to, are they still going to be needed in 10 years' time? So many people have moved to home working. They're not going to vanish overnight, but certainly you can't see that many people going back in 5 days a week, even for businesses themselves. Why would you pay for a massive floor, massive office when you could just have a smaller one? So you can see how the construction industry could be hit by that. So one thing we think, Welsh Government clearly needs to have the powers to be able to borrow more. And one of the obvious things they could invest in is constructing new social housing. So we could, use public money to build social housing that we desperately need, but also it would be providing jobs for people in the construction industry that might otherwise be struggling to get jobs because of what's going on with COVID-19. So I think that presents a real opportunity. But even beyond that, we think, there is a case for us maybe to try and draw attention to some of the other funds that Welsh Government is spending on schemes that aren't going into social housing. Could we just target that? All our social housing, would that be more effective? I think that's certainly a conversation that should be had. I was talking to colleagues in Scotland actually in the week, and they said the Scottish Government has spent £3 billion on affordable housing over the last government. I know Welsh Government has spent quite a bit of money, but I don't think it's that much. So, is there lessons we can learn from them, for example, about what they've done? Because I think they've been really effective from what I understand in terms of constructing new social housing.
Okay, so there's still scope to lobby Welsh Government for more funding, but also some practical solutions and to join some of these funding pots together to tackle wider issues, but also look at the bigger picture and the links to the housing issues as well. Yeah, I hadn't thought about all the office space, or there could be empty office space potentially in future, which could be converted to quality social housing as well. So there may be a load of different opportunities out there as well. I just want to end finally on a sort of question around, you mentioned before about, the resulting impact of COVID-19 as well. I know it's hard to predict, but we're just wondering, what do you think the impact will be? But also, does it mean we'll need to take a different approach to solving poverty in the future?
I think it's certainly going to be quite significant, the impact, in terms of, a lot of people were talking early on about this V-shaped recession, weren't they? So the idea that things are going to get really bad really quick, but then improve really quick. Well, if we've read, I think in terms of the virus itself, it sounds, I'm no expert but from what we hear, and it certainly sounds things aren't going to return to normal before the new year from some of the stuff's been discussed. But also, if we've already seen double the number of people claiming out of work benefits, that really suggests that if we do have a lot of people losing their jobs, that's going to have a further economic impact. So I think it's certainly not going to bounce back very quickly, and therefore is going to have real effects. But there could be some opportunities as well. So in terms of, as I said, more people might be working from home. So is there a chance for us to build our communities a bit more? If you think of in South Wales, for example, or in the Northeast, how many people commute from the valleys into Cardiff every day, or commute from Flintshire and Wrexham into Chester every day? If more people have been allowed to work from home over this period in those sorts of jobs, is there a chance that they'll still be allowed, if people are allowed to do that more in the longer term, could we build our communities? Could people go out to buy a coffee in the village, during the day, not just on the weekend? It gives maybe opportunities for us there to reinvest and rebuild some of our communities. So there are these opportunities as well, maybe, but we really need to try and seize, to try and, make the best of the situation as well, I think.
Okay, so spreading some of the wealth and income more fairly across Wales rather than just perhaps in the big city or urban areas. Yeah, so interesting points. Is something we'll probably come back to as well on this, isn't it? And I imagine Bevan will be looking at this subject area and the impact of COVID-19 on poverty as we go forward. I just want to say a big thank you to Staffan, but also thank you to yourselves for some of your comments Some great comments coming in, and so really great to see that people are really committed to trying to tackle poverty, whether it's practically in their own organisation, whether we have some people saying the challenges of trying to apply for benefits on behalf of some tenants as well, but also for those people who may be in a position to perhaps lobby greater the decision makers and influencers at Welsh Government around how we can tackle poverty, but also about working collaboratively with communities as well to tackle some of the issues going forward as well. So a big thank you to Staffan. As I mentioned before, Staffan is happy to take any emails afterwards. Its details are on the Bevan Foundation website. If you want to know more about Bevan Foundation, how you can become a member, even if you're an individual, I think you'd become members and supporters as well. Find out about the work they're doing and keep in touch with what Bevan are doing and their findings, because they're pushing a lot of good work out, a lot of interesting work which can influence communities and housing issues as well. Just before I end, I just wanted to remind people of our latest Tenant Pulse survey. If you haven't seen it, or if you've got tenants you think might be interested, please do encourage them. Closing date is Monday, but there are some really important questions there. It is a follow-up survey to our one on COVID-19, but there are some really important questions in there around people's ability to pay rent in the current situation. What are the causes of that? Do they know what to do? So there are some related questions in there, so it'd be interesting to see those results there. If you do want those details about Pulse, how you can promote it as well, or if you're a tenant and you want to fill the survey in directly, do get in touch with us and we can let you know how you can do that. But do it quick. Something to do over the weekend or even today. So thanks everyone for your comments. Please keep in touch with us. Like I said, please look out for our other webinars coming up over the next few weeks. There's lots of interesting ones there, and appreciate all your support from our members and tenants and residents as well. Okay, thank you, folks.